Hey guys, I'm FatBuddyCat, and this is a Coleman BT200X. Dare I say that no engine was harmed in the making of this video. We're actually going to build one of these back a little bit better. And that is this one right here. This is the 196 that I just put together and ran in Pennsylvania. It was awesome. It did what it had to do. But now we're going to push it a little bit further. There's a few things I liked, so we're going to try to keep them. That includes that wicked sweet governor linkage. Alright, that's not the governorless one, that's the one you run with the governor. Well, here's the thing, it's not in here anymore. That's what it's supposed to look like. Alright, you get Felicia hanging up in the corner there, and then that hockey stick coming down through the top. I just popped the gear out, tapped the block, and threaded in a 1/4 bolt with some red Loctite, just like I always do. For that armature, I just removed it, and I cut the curved part off of it. I was careful and made sure that I left that retention section that holds the washers. From the top, everything looks the same. Our return spring will come over here. It'll pull this lever, and this will actuate the throttle from that linkage. When we're all done, of course. While we're in here, we're going to do some more upgrades. We have a new cam. This is a Dynacam's CS265. So it's got some ramping, but not a whole lot of duration. This is the piston and rod that just came out of the 196, and the piston's going to go back in with those rings, except it's not going to go with that rod. It's going to go with this ARC stock length rod. This bearing is set for a different crank. My friends at OMB Warehouse have a new bearing and bolts available. We're going to use those to set this rod to a brand new BSP crank. This is a 3/4, so we're moving up from the 16mm at this point. Everything else is the same with the stroke and all. It's just a stock replacement. This journal is different than the crank journal that was in there. It's not exact. This will get us where we need to be. I'm going to go ahead and set that just like I always do. I've done it enough times. You can go back and try to find one of those videos. But I'll catch up with you when I have the crank in there connected to this rod with that piston chilling in that cylinder. I mean, feels good. Normal. I set my rings by hand. Made sure to clean everything up. You can see there's copious amounts of oil everywhere. Now I'm going to clean up my lifters and my cam. These are just the 196 GX200 lifters. And we'll throw a little extra honey in the pot. We'll check the compression release on the cam. Make sure everything's moving freely. Inspect the spring. Alright, everything looks in good shape. Now I just have to line up the timing dots and drop the cam in. I'm running the ARC billet side cover for a few different reasons. One, strength. This is a stock Hyson 196 block, and there is actually some integrity to the side cover. Alright, and that translates directly into the side of the block and helps support it. It has dual bearings. It can be torqued a little bit tighter. That's kind of like one reason, all wrapped together. The second reason is for a better seal. Alright, that can get into the ability of torquing these bolts tighter, but also we're running a rubber O-ring gasket instead of a paper job. The third reason is right there. I have a barb set up for a block vent. These have two holes that are already pre-threaded. The other one just has a plug in it for now. The hardest part about installing the ARC side cover is going back and forth, figuring out how many shims you need to get your end plate just right. I think I'm going to be good where I am if I hold it and yank on it. You can just like barely hear it and feel it move. That's what you want. Lube, lube, lube it up before you send it home. Everything get a little bit. Make sure your bearings get it. They're in place. The shims are where they need to be. I checked my dots one more time. The ARC side cover uses the solid dowels, so both of those are there. There's nothing that shouldn't be in the bottom of my engine other than a little bit of extra honey. We're ready to seal the deal. I'm going to get this side cover on, and I'm going to be setting these bolts at 20 foot-pounds. I'm using a little bit of blue Loctite on the last few threads of these bolts as well. Perfect. Now I'm going to clean up my mess so that we can concentrate on the head. The only modification up here is swapping out the stock valves, 18-pound springs, and slip retainers for some stainless valves, same size, 22-pound springs, and some split style retainers. There's some nice billet ones. Those hold nice and tight. First thing I gotta do is open up these valves and lap them into the head. The head is all cleaned up, and I already have the exhaust valve installed. These are 22s, which I can do with my bare hands and my thumb bucklers. I'll get the intake seal cleaned up and get that other valve in there. I'm actually not sloppy. I'm quite methodical. I just happen to be limited on space and time right now. Cap full of water in each one of my ports. I've got it sitting on top of a dry paper towel. Let that simmer. See if anything comes out of our valves down below after about, I don't know, 5 minutes or so. We're going to take that time, because it's so precious, to lap on our billet flywheel. This is going to give us 8 degrees of timing and, you know, some added safety. Even with a stock style carb, we're still going to be spinning some good RPM here. I'm going to have to hook up my crank holder tool and get the flywheel nut cup. What a mess. I fall in love with this tool every time I use it. It only took me a couple minutes to get the flywheel lapped, torqued on, and I even set the coil gap at 2 business cards. I get my tool back and we'll get the head on. This is going to make it easier to find top dead center when we're finally lashing the valves up here. There's some oil down there. The bottom of my cylinder sitting on top of my piston. That's because this has been open to the elements. I'm going to spread that around, and then I'll turn my flywheel. I'll bring that oil up, and I'm going to catch it with a rag. I'm going to do that 3 times. This rod and piston combination leaves us plenty at the deck. We're going to be using a 10 thousandths head gasket. Before I get that on, I'm going to add my Mondo studs. I have the nuts back there somewhere. There they are. I'm not going to use any Loctite. I'm just going to thread these in all the way. Gasket, and then it'll be time for the head. The head was bone dry, so our valves aren't leaking. I'm putting the 4 Mondo nuts on the studs, and I'm using something of a, I don't know, medium deep 1/2-inch socket so that I can access those. It just makes using the torque wrench easier. That way you don't need an extension. Once they're snug, then I'll go back and torque them. Juggle around. That way you bring it down evenly. Push rods, lash caps, and then the rockers. As I lower those down onto these studs, I'll bring the push rod into play and then use a free hand to get a nut on and snug it down. That way it stays in place. Something just like that. Now I got to do the other side. Once they're in place, I back the adjusters off and torque these nuts at 94 inch-pounds. So that's the 1/4 inch torque wrench. That's the same wrench we do the connecting rod with. That one's 170 inch-pounds. You get used to these specs after a while. 3/8 torque wrench. That's our big dog. That one does our foot-pounds. 20 foot-pounds side cover. 20 foot-pounds on those Mondo nuts. And 65 on that Billet flywheel. I just lashed these valves out at 0.0015. A little bit tighter on the exhaust than the intake, but same feeler gauge. Hug the exhaust, kiss the intake. Now, we're going to steal some parts from the engine that was on the mini bike that this engine is going on. It makes complete sense. This one is a little, dare I say it, too modified. It comes down to what we're going to be doing with the carburetor and why we're going with a stock carburetor. We'll get to that. What we are going to be taking is the valve cover, vent system, the header support, the gas tank, and the gas tank riser system. I'm also going to nab this fuel line. We'll run a secondary shut-off valve and filter. Well, we'll just have one filter because we're going to use this tank into a stock carburetor over here. So we'll just have two shutoffs, one in line and then one on the carb itself. Over here, I'm going to nab that hose and everything. I think it's going to fit on this engine too. That one bolt is the entire reason that this happened. Both of these engines are pretty much the same. Very much the same. Same cam, same flywheel, same piston, same head, same valves, rockers, everything. Except for the carburetor. We got a slide job on here and our traditional governor removal. The whole reason I did this is so that I could have that engine with a stock carb and the tuck and run linkage. I'm very passionate about what I do. Let's just say that. I'm going to be hooking that up next. We have plenty of room underneath this gas tank. We have better flow coming out of it. So we got that going for us too. I don't think we're going to need it because we're going to try to run a tricked out air box. I'm going to be attending a bit of a race. And part of it is surviving. It could be rainy, muddy, it could fall. I don't want to put my carburetor in harm's way, and I want to better the chances of my air filter staying attached to the engine, or all of the parts for that matter. We're going to be running stock carb. This is the same one that was on this engine before. I have a 660 board carb, but I think we're going to be asking too much from the airflow side of things. We could do it, and it's not going to be hard to try it, right? Because everything is right in front of us. We're going to put this one on first, and we'll get it to run, which it will. We get a 37 jet. I don't think that's going to be asking too awful much. Yeah, we'll be all right. Well, so much for that attempt. No matter what I do, trying to run the fuel line externally is going to be an issue with this linkage. So I'm just going to swap the tank out, and we'll run it, you know, somewhat regular style. We'll have the regular filter bung on the bottom, and then I'll run the line on the inside of the fan shroud and come out and straight to the carburetor, just like factory. To get the tank off, I just have to remove this bolt and these two nuts. I might as well show you this now because you're probably not going to be able to see it later. That little ear hanging up there. Okay, it's just a square piece of rubber. And that goes between the tab and the tank now. Kind of like we got going on the front. So it'll help with vibration and also holding tension on that bolt when it's threaded into that hole. Now that I have my tank on, I'm going to modify this linkage a little bit, and it's just the throttle rod section that comes from the linkage over to this linkage and meets at this clevis. The rod that came with it is plenty long, and it does hang out a little bit on the end. I'm just going to make it hang out a little bit more. I have a piece of coat hanger that already has the bend on the end so that it can't come out. Make sure it goes in the right hole. It's going to be way over here when we're done with it. This thing's got some tension on that return spring. I love it. Alright, so we're going to have like a tail hanging out when we're at full return. We're going to use that tail to add a spare clevis. Where did I get this? It's pretty cool, actually. Stock linkages. Alright, the same as this one. Sometimes they're on the arm and stuff. Here's one like we're using right now. Flip it over, and there's just a little clip. If you call it a C clip. That's frustrating. Alright, there it is. Okay, you can see it plain as day. A pair of pliers, flathead screwdriver. You yank that clip off, and you're the proud new owner of a clevis that also fits your throttle rod. We're going to use it as like a spare stop on the end so that it can't pull through. Easiest way to do this is to take the throttle arm off. Alright, once that's off, you can slide it over the rod. The rod's in place, it can't come out because it's got that unique little bend on it. Now I just have to put the arm back in place, add the hardware and the return springs. Don't forget the throttle actuation spring, we'll call that one. Yeah, gotta be technical, you know. That's pretty much what it's gonna look like once we add the cable. I just have to figure out this geometry. The cable's going to be coming like that, and it's going to pick it up and then work the pivot. Whatever. Once I figure that out and I get it perfect, I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to add a bend with this excess tail. So I'll have an extra clevis and a bend. That way, no matter what, this rod can't pull out. As long as it goes to return, we can still give her some juice and keep on rolling. The factory airbox is actually a two-piece design. There's a couple screws. There's one right here and the other one was right there. Alright, take those out of the equation. Ta-da! Now we have two halves. We look down inside. There's a little bit of an oily residue going around the outside parameter of this thing. That is from this inlet right here. That came from the stock vent line. So it came out of the valve cover and went directly into the intake. From the intake, it would be recycled back through the carburetor. Whoop-de-doo. That's not happening anymore, so I'm going to seal that hole up. Some of my friends have modified these, and a lot of times what you do is remove this stud altogether, and then you cut this base out and those goofy looking fins. You could then cut these side pieces off and, you know, open things up a bit. Instead of opening it, I'm going to try closing it up. I have a bolt somewhere here that is going to fit, here it is, that hole. It's just a 10mm coarse thread. Alright, if I force it, I can get it to start in there, since this is metal and that's plastic. That doesn't mean it's going to seal all the way. I'm going to use some silicone. It just dries up a little quicker than using something like an epoxy. I'm going to fill that hole, insert my bolt, thread it in, and then I'm going to fill in this void behind this screw hole here, and this one over here. That way the air has no option but to come directly up that throat and then up through here right? Or I should say down through there, because it's going to go through the filter, down the gilly. So we'll leave those big air cannons for now. I think those are going to help us, not hurt us. I just dumped about 16 ounces of 10W30 in a cap full of zinc additive inside the engine. I'm still waiting for the silicone to dry on the other half of that air box. So we're going to keep moving forward by mounting the engine on the riser plate. Isn't that something? And after that, we'll get the torque converter on there. This was a brand new torque converter plate that came with the Coleman Stage 2 torque converter kit that I just ran. So those bearings are still frothing with red number 2 grease that I stuffed inside. Everything spins alright. It's got a red spring on there, and I didn't have any guff from my backwards facing nylock nut. I'm gonna let that fly for now. 4 more bolts. Not much further ahead. We're gonna end up putting this on the mini bike before that's dry. I told you we'd end up here. Those 4 bolts aren't tight, but they are holding the engine in place. Now we got to take a look at the chain alignment. We're going to end up pulling that back wheel. I'll show you why though. Some of you might remember this from before. I had a little bit of a personal discrepancy with my chain alignment. I like mine to be perfect. That way everything spins like hot butter. It also has less of a chance of coming off the sprockets. I have a piece of steel tubing. It's really straight, and I'm holding it against the back face of the wheel sprocket. That means the front of the tube, or the other end of it I should say, should also fall on the rear face of the sprocket. However, it doesn't. You see where it is in relation to that sprocket? Alright, we're just to the front. I'd say by, I don't know, roughly a 1/4 inch. We don't need to get it perfect, but if we get it over something close to a 1/4 inch, maybe a fat 1/8, it's going to have a whole lot better chance rolling between the two of those. The 4-hole steel sprockets that bolt up to these flange style 8-inch rims work off of the face of the flange. That means our chain can only be on this side. We need it to go in the other direction, back towards the rim and tire. You're never going to do it with that. The only way you can accomplish this is with a sprocket adapter. This sprocket adapter uses ring sprockets. This is a steel ring sprocket. This one is actually a 54 tooth, which we're going to be using today. These adapters have 2 sides. They have different offsets. If we place the adapter on like that and we attach a sprocket to it, no matter which side the sprocket's mounted to, we're going to be on the top of that flange. We have to be on the bottom, correct? This gives us a small offset in the other direction if we mount our sprocket on the face like this and then place it like so. We need just a little bit more offset. So I just bolted one on and I added a washer in between. This goes on just like this. Line up the 4 holes. And now our sprocket is towards the bottom of the flange. You see that? I think we're actually lined up pretty much perfectly with this face right there. So I'm going to bolt this on and get the rim back on the mini bike, and we get our straight edge between the sprockets again. See how we did. If this is as straight as I think it is, then we are extremely close to where I want to be. Push that sprocket all the way in. If I look at the back side of the plate in relation to that rod, and the rod is square, then the plate is out of square a little bit, which means I can loosen up the 4 bolts holding the block onto the riser, and I should be able to shimmy that into perfect square by going that way on the rear. It's just a hair. I'm going to call this good, because we still don't want the chain hitting on the plate back here. We're going to use a 420 gold, so it's going to be fat. We will have just one spacer back there now. We might have 2. All said and done. I'm going to loosen that up, pitch it square, and then we'll look at getting a chain on here. I think with that flange on the rim, we would have a hard time dropping the chain back in between, which would be nice too. We're barely clearing this tab. I'll pull the rear wheel and cut that off. Since I'm dropping down to a 54 tooth from a 60 tooth in the rear, I went ahead and swapped from a 10 tooth to a 9 tooth in the front. Hopefully we'll get a little more torque that way. I already have this chain cut. It's as short as it possibly can be. I have the axle all the way forward, and the engine is almost all the way forward on the riser as well. If this loosens up, I think it'll be from vibration and the engine moving this way, but if it does, we're just going to tighten it at the axle afterwards. That's just about perfect right there right now. So now I have to get a key cut, because this one's a little bit shorter. The 9 tooth has the key incorporated in it so that it doesn't need one. You can't really see it, but it's in the keyway. See how it's locked in. I'll get that figured out. And oh, I think I'm going to switch to the yellow spring pulley instead of the red. We should be able to pick up some torque there too. To get a nice healthy gap between the back of my pulley and my chain, I just used my angle grinder to take down that lip. That's where the chain was catching anyway. I did that to my red spring and my yellow spring pulley. That way I have a backup. I think I'm going to be able to get my entire nut and nylock section now. I don't have a washer back there. I don't need one. I like this. Let me see if I have a new nut. Oh yeah. We got all the nylocks out of that nut. This pulley isn't going anywhere anytime soon. I hooked up the throttle, kill switch, and partially adjusted the brakes. I think I still have to mess with this down here. Where we came all the way forward on the axle, sometimes you have to clock the actual arm where it is on those lines. I'm going to try not to. That way when I move the axle back, everything's a-okay. That silicone's curing up good. It's all one big glob that goes down into this crevice where that bolt is. So even if that were to come unadhered from the plastic on the housing itself, it still wouldn't be able to be sucked out of its spot and pulled down into the manifold or the carburetor. Same thing over here. I might trim that one up with a razor. Maybe not. It's fine how it is too. I still have to finish off that safety that I was working on. And what else could I do? I guess I could space out my driver and get my hardware ready. I want to start this thing without it this time, you know, just for safety. And yeah, we're getting there, guys. Yeah, buddy, that'll definitely work. It's just like a big rubber plug. It goes around that cylinder and down in, like I said. Once the cover goes over this and it's screwed on, that thing couldn't lift out if it wanted to. I cut the other side back and used a push rod to stuff it down inside a little bit better. Now that it's dry, I'll use my fingernail to just get that flaky crap off of there. I already did this side. Nice and clean. Hopefully this just increases the efficiency of the carburetor pulling air in from the filter itself. We're taking away these voids that it would otherwise have to draw from. It's going to be more direct this way. I mean, it's worth a shot. I'm going to get it put back together and I'll show you how the filter stays in there. That's custom too. There you go. Try to picture that now. You have that pathway right down the middle between the two cylinders that those screws are set into. All of our silicone is underneath here and right over here. The air should just go right past it, down the hatch, and into the Carburetor. Now comes the filter. This is a 35mm job, probably off a Chinese slider. I'm not sure what size it would be, whether it's a PZ22 or something, but 35mm is that inside diameter for the opening. It drilled a hole, dead nut center, right through the metal on the top. I have the bottom cut off. It was a little bit longer. Actually, I think this one had a curve on it, and I cut it off. You ended up with something about yay long that you could have slipped over and clamped onto this cylinder here. What I didn't like was that it was square on the sides. Alright, and some guys remove the stud. I'm going to show you why I left it. It's also why I drilled that hole. Here is a soft rubber ring. It came from an air filter. I'm not sure if it was the factory one. It probably was. Anyways, this fits right over this. Alright. And then the air filter is going to go over that. It's going to line up the hole. There we go. Alright. I have another piece of rubber that's going to go on top of here, just like that. And then a modified cover. I just drilled a bunch of holes in it, and I did not do the back side or that inside. I'm thinking that that will protect it from the back, with or without fender. You have mud and debris coming up. Okay, same thing on that back side. So our fresh air would be coming from the side and the front. Looks like we picked up a spring. On the inside of this, I just cut this back a little. I don't even know if I have another one to show you what was there. It just had like a plastic ring that extruded downward. I think it had something to do with catching onto the factory foam filter thing that was on here. Who knows? She's gone now, and that's what we're left with. I'm going to get that on and then find my wing nut that went on top. As you tighten the wing nut, you can immediately feel the cover start to press down. On the inside, this is pressing down on that rubber, okay, against that hole that's on the top of the filter, and it's sealing there. It is then pushing the filter itself downward onto that soft rubber ring. So we're getting a better seal there. I don't know, I thought that was pretty neat. That should be tight enough. I don't want to go too far. I don't know what too far is. I guess plastic could give. I don't want that. Air can go in here and here as well. This hole we're leaving open. That is something of a drain in case any water or something get inside. Now we can take this a step further. Remove the cover, and I can put a pre-filter over that filter and then just put a little hole in it so that our stud goes through the top. Depending on conditions, I might do that, but I want to see if it works first. I'm getting ready to put my airbox on here, and I get to looking at this linkage because last time I had it hooked up with the governor, well, it was supposed to be. When I rip the Hornet release, it goes open, but then see how it bounces on the close, and then sometimes it doesn't close all the way, like right there. Alright, that's gonna be like, wah, you know, who knows how many RPM. So we're gonna need a return spring pulling this arm in that direction. I don't think there's anything we can do from this linkage end. It's going to be something from that arm probably back to this same fan shroud bolt that I have my kill switch wired to. It's just a ground. It's not going to affect anything. Well now, didn't that just turn into a quick little lesson in reverse engineering? There's a spring right here. I could add a zip tie to make it more tensile, I guess, solid. It would yank all those coils together so it would just kind of pull as one, or maybe you could replace it with something that was solid. Here's what you run into. See how the spring stretches? When you're running your return spring, which I kept ridiculously simple, you can't have it stiffer than that spring right there, because if it is, then it won't pull from this end. So you go to like do this, and the spring will do that, but nothing will move. That gave me the idea to use the same spring. I had a spare, and I just attached it. Let me turn the light on. Right there. I didn't have to take off the tank, the linkage, nothing. I hooked on, and I conveniently had this hole that's for an extra kill switch. Oh, it's got a rubber plug in it. It's actually in there pretty tight. Alright, I just hooked on to that right there. That nice big hook. So we have positive placement. Just pull it back down. Not too much tension. Even if that cap were to come out, I don't think that's going to come off. That's awesome. Good, loud. You have it set to an idle without the cover on. I don't think it's going to make that big a difference. I don't have a load on this, so I don't want to push it too hard. If I get the cover on it, I'll make an adjustment. It might come down a little. I don't want to come down too low to compensate. This is a performance engine. Pull the bike upright. I don't know, it was kind of calming down a little bit before. I think I found that happy point. So loud. Yeah, see, it's high. Then when you stand it up, it drops down. I'm setting up my driver, and I noticed that I had an extravagant amount of free play in my pulley. Well, that's because the 9.2 sprocket that I was using is not only used but a little bit abused. I've put in some work on it, and it has wallowed out a little bit, and I'm not sure if it's just maybe the key that wore. Well, anyways, I switched back to a 10 tooth, which has the key going all the way through. It doesn't seem to have any free play in it now. Good part about this is if I go to replace it, I can just use the key and spacers and everything that come with one of these 30 series drivers, so I don't have to think too much. I ended up spinning my nylock nut around. That way I have all of these threads covered with the nylock section. This has held up before in the past, and I think it'll be alright. I'll check my hardware store and see if I can get one of the narrower profiles so that I can spin the nut around, you know what I mean, and it'll have a few threads on this side. It'll be empty. I think I got one somewhere. Yep. Alright, so they do make those. When I set the tension this time around, I brought the engine back a little bit on the riser there so that it's more of a neutral position. Plus, the further I go back, the more of that foot peg I think I open up. Not that that really matters. I went back on the adjusters at the axle and that actually helped our brake situation. We'll see how this thing stretches out. I still have to lube it up. It's bone dry right now. I'd like to bring the engine all the way back and do OMB adjustment at the axle, but like I said, we'll see how it stretches out and things turn up after we put some power to it. I'm going to run a Torquezilla, but I think this could work for a regular 30 series too. I really don't see why not. I have an axle. This should be straight. I'm going to put it on the face of Torquezilla here. Alright, and then lower it down towards the pulley. Alright, the pulley is, you know, something of a taper where that's flat. That's why you don't work off the pulley to the driver. You work off the back of the driver to the pulley. And you want to just line up there at the top. We're looking good. I have a key, a bolt, and a lock washer and washer. I'll be holding this puppy in place. I'm not fully torqued. I just held on to the driver with one hand and reefed on this wrench with the other. I'm running a genuine Comet belt. We'll see how everything turns out, and if I like it, which I think I will, I'm going to torque this and we'll fit a cover. Spoiler alert, I already took this mini bike racing, and let me tell you, this thing did amazing. It might not be the spiciest meatball in the batch, but it did everything it had to do and then some. This is after a 3-lap main event. The chain is absolutely perfect. That's usually the weak spot. Those things fall off, and when you only have 2 or 3 laps total, it's hard to recover. The bike's cold right now. It is 100% due for an oil change. It's been broken in. Starts the same every time. Once it warms up, the idle picks up a little bit. this Coleman survived Goma's mini bike massacre down in Wareham, Massachusetts. So I'm not exactly afraid to give her all the beans here in the dooryard. If you're not familiar with Gomas, well, it's a very untraditional race. It's a massacre because it's riddled with obstacles whose intent are to take you out. You get a heat race, which is 2 laps, and then you get your main event. That's only 3 laps. That's not a whole lot when you got 30 guys on the field and only the top 3 count. In the heat, I placed second, and in the main event, I was 5th or 6th. The adrenaline was going. They only count the top 3, so it was a little bit foggy, but we were definitely right up there. I was running hot in a pack of 4 of these BT200X, and let me tell you what, these are the bike to have. The ergonomics are amazing, and it's just overall rugged. I used all of that suspension. I definitely bottomed out a few times. The bearings were new and they still seem, like new. I haven't really inspected it yet, but everything is in good shape. The 304G brake pads are the only upgrade back here, besides these tires that really helped. Those did amazing. I made an adjustment between the heat and the final race right up here. That's it. The chain didn't come loose and it did not come off. I'm glad I spent the time working that alignment out. It's hot in here today, boy. Over on the exhaust side, that header support, I highly recommend. I didn't have any issues with this. The nuts didn't even loosen up. All I have is a lock washer under there. No problems with the torque converter. Torquezilla did its thing. You may have noticed the pre-filters. It was wet out in the morning. As soon as things dried out, or somewhat dried out, it was right to the races. I put this on my PCV just to keep it dry. And I even got one down here in the air box. Nice and clean. Beautiful. We're going to try one more upgrade with this. And that's going to be that 660 carb I was talking about. Now that we know that this works, I want to know if it'll work if we ask for just a little bit more. Oh yeah, there's that too. As cool as this exhaust sounds, and as good as it is for this engine's performance, it is just ridiculously loud. This is going to be reaching for the stars. Especially with that carb. There's only one way to find out. I'm going to change the oil and get right after it. Have a good night, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.
I want you to stop. stay. I want you to stay.